Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up part 1 and I will be talking about the first couple of books that I read in the first 2 weeks of this month. I've read 3 books so far this month, which is a little bit lower than what I usually do for my mid-month wrap-ups. Not that I'm complaining at all. 3 is a great number to get through, but I will say that part of the reason why is because of the first book that I read this month, and that is Blindness by Jose Saramago. And this was translated by Giovanni Pontiero, translated from the Portuguese. So yeah, this is a book I've had my eye on for a while. I've actually owned this copy for a number of years now, and I'm finally getting around to reading it. I read a different book by Jose Saramago a couple of years ago. I can't even remember what it's called now. But I had always heard like the blindness is like his like almost pinnacle point. So this is a dystopian type book. It takes place in this unnamed city, and at the beginning of the story you are following this one man who is driving home when all of a sudden he goes blind, and he says that all he can see is white. And so he's driving a car and he's at a red light when it happens to him. You know, he obviously freaks out and doesn't know what to do and has no idea sort of like how to get home, anything like that. Someone offers to, drive him home, and then he's taken home to his wife, and then after that point this sort of blindness epidemic slowly spreads across multiple people who seem to come into contact with each other, and then slowly it spreads throughout the entire city. So when these first handful of people go blind, the government authorities decide that what they're going to do is they're going to gather them up together because they've all had contact with each other. So they assume that it's an epidemic. So they want to contain them. They gather them all up and decide to confine them in a former mental hospital. And then the mental hospital sort of starts to fill up with people as the blindness epidemic spreads, and you follow them inside of this hospital as they basically try to figure out what is going on as well as what is happening, because they are completely blind. And so they have very little understanding of like obviously what's going on. They're confined to the space. They don't even interact with like the soldiers or anyone else who's like supposed to be like delivering their food or anything like that, because those people don't want to become contaminated. That's like a very basic introduction to the plot, but that's not really what this book is about. This book is sort of an analysis of the deepest horrors of being human and of society, and sort of the depths of our own depravity. But that also makes it sound like it's really bleak. I mean, it is bleak at times, but there's also these moments of like hope and joy of seeing these people sort of rally together at points and help each other out, and even how they're able to find the motivation to continue living when they have no idea if there's a cure, how this happened to them, who's around them. Some days they don't even know if they're going to get food. And some really, really dark things happen in this book, and some really dark concepts are explored in this book. So this book is a little over 300 pages, but it took me a really long time to get through it for 2 reasons. One of them is because it's so dark that like I didn't want to read it all the time. I was basically reading this on the train, and I didn't want to read it outside of on the train because I felt like it was so dark that reading it like before bed or anything like that, it like almost putting that in my head, I didn't want it too much. But the other reason why this book took me a really long time to read is because of the way this book is written. I'm going to open to a random page. I don't know how clearly you guys are going to see this, but this is all like one paragraph, and the paragraph continues on to this page. And that is very much how this entire book is formatted. It's these giant, giant paragraphs and these giant, almost run-on sentences type of situations, but they're not run-on sentences because he uses commas in places where there should be periods. And there's no like breaks in dialogue. There are no paragraph breaks for dialogues. There's not even periods necessarily between dialogues. Like a lot of times you have to follow a conversation in these giant paragraphs, and the only indication that you get sometimes that the person who's speaking has changed is because of a capital letter in the middle of this what looks like a run-on sentence. And I know for a fact that that sort of formatting is going to really piss off some people and put people off of this book. So if that's the type of thing that like really bothers you, then you're not going to enjoy this book. To me, I don't mind when books and writers take those types of liberties, and I think that in this case it served a purpose because it really forces you to slow down and it really forces you to fully engage with the text. I was reading maybe like 10 or 20 pages a day at most. Because of the way that this book is formatted, I really had to slow down. The other thing I would say is that I couldn't read this on ebook. I originally checked this out from the library as an ebook to like read with me on the train, and I eventually had to stop doing that because like those giant paragraphs, I kept getting lost about where I was and what was going on. So yeah, those are like just general things that you guys should be aware of. But overall, I really enjoyed this book as much as you can enjoy a book that is super dark. I think the things that Jose Saramago explores in here are just so interesting and just so true about just general human nature, the depths of our depravity, as well as like the heights of our generosity to each other, the ways that we continually try to find joy and motivation and just connection with people despite everything that's really going on. So yeah, I really do recommend this if you're someone who enjoys literary fiction. If you are okay with that sort of like dense and dark topic, then I definitely think that this is worth picking up, because I think that the things that he explores in here are so well done. The way that he uses the blindness as sort of like this larger metaphor for society and things like that. Yeah, it was so good. But yeah, it took me a long time, at least relatively long time compared to the other books that I read, to get through this one, just because it's dense in both topic and just writing style. The next book that I finished was Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is a book I read for the Read Harder challenge of read a classic of genre, and obviously this is a classic science fiction book. This is also a book I picked up because back in January when I was talking about A Wrinkle in Time, I mentioned that I don't like time travel stories, and so many people were like, yeah, time travel stories are the worst, but you have to still read Kindred. So I did, and everyone's right. Time travel stories are the worst, but Kindred is great. So in this story, if you aren't aware of the plot, you are following this woman named Data, who is 26 years old. She's living in California. I believe that this book takes place in the 1970s. And she's celebrating her birthday when all of a sudden she's transported back in time to the antebellum South, and she sees this young boy who is drowning, and so she like jumps into the river and saves his life. Obviously she doesn't know that she's traveled in time or where she is or what's happening, but she eventually learns that she's not like at home or anywhere near home or anything like that. So the short version of the synopsis is basically that she gets transported back in time to the South to save the life of one of her ancestors, and it is a white man that she is saving, and she is a black woman. So every time she gets transported back into time, it's at a different point in his life, and it's for different periods of time. So the first time it was only for maybe like a couple of minutes that she was there. In her present timeline, she was gone for maybe a couple of seconds. So it's about her dealing with this struggle of going back in time to save this white man who is not really a great person, but also trying to save his life because she knows he's an ancestor of hers, and so Dana doesn't know like what will happen to her if something does happen to him. But also every time she's transported back for a longer period of time, so she's forced to live in the South as a black woman while slavery still happens. And as things progress, it starts to get sort of like more dangerous and more uncertain how everything's going to turn out. Yeah, I don't really know what I can say about this book that hasn't been said before by other people other than it's fantastic. If you are someone who is like me and doesn't read a lot of science fiction, and so you've been maybe avoiding this one because you aren't sure like how science fiction-y, so to speak, it might be, I still highly recommend this book. I feel like this one feels sort of like one of those crossover books where it feels more like literary fiction, but it has sort of these sci-fi elements to it. Sort of like Colson Whitehead almost, where he sort of mixes genres and crosses genres quite a bit. Like I could definitely see a through line from this book to his style of writing as well. The story in here is fantastic. It's so complex. There are points in here that are so like that like chest tightening, anxiety inducing sort of situations where you don't know what's going to happen. In this book, Dana is also married to a white man, and there's complications that come along with that as well. It's such a great exploration of race and race relations and slavery. And yeah, I mean, this is just one of those books that it goes on those lists of everyone should read this. Like, I think this would be a great book for high schoolers to read, honestly. Like, if kids were reading this in school, I think they would be so much more interested in their English classes. All right, and the final book that I have to talk about really quickly is The Night Guest by Fiona McFarland. This is a book I read for the Read Harder Challenge of Read, a book with a female protagonist over the age of 60. The main character in here is 75, so mission accomplished. So in this story, you are following this woman named Ruth who is widowed. She has 2 sons who are grown up, married, and have moved away. The story takes place in Australia, and she lives in sort of like this small beach town. At the beginning of the story, Ruth wakes up and she is convinced that there is a tiger in her house, but she never actually sees or confronts the tiger. So she calls her son and he calms her down, and then she goes back to sleep. The next day, a woman named Fiona shows up at her house saying that she is a government care worker who has come to help her out, and she'll be showing up for a couple of mornings every day. And so this story is about mainly following Ruth and Fiona and trying to figure out what exactly is happening here. I don't want to say more than that, although the synopsis gives you more than that. And I think even in my goal update video that I did last week, I say more than that, because I realized that knowing more than that kind of took away some of the fun of this book for me. I think if you go into this knowing that it's about this older woman and sort of her life from that point forward, then what happens in this book is so much more interesting and surprising. I went into it knowing more than that, and I feel like this book felt like it dragged, because there are parts in here where it's like, okay, I know. All right, I'm going to say at this point that if you don't want to know anymore and you want to pick up this book, skip ahead till you don't see me holding up this book anymore, because from this point forward, I'm not going to do spoilers, but I'm going to talk about more of the plot and how that impacted my reading experience, which you may or may not want to know, but forewarning. All right, so the part of this book that I knew going into it is the fact that there are suspicions about what exactly is going on with Ruth and Fiona, this woman who has shown up at her door. Is Fiona telling the truth? Is she actually a government care worker? And also, like, what is happening with Ruth's mental state? So from that synopsis, I basically assumed from the beginning that Fiona was up to no good and something rotten was going on. So all of the reveals that were slowly happening weren't really surprising and was more like, oh man, this is just going down a terrible path. And then in the end, I found that I just wanted to know what was happening in the end, so I felt like I was reading just for the ending and not really enjoying the book as much for what it is. I will say that this book is really interesting and explores really interesting things about people as they get older and sort of the care and the watchful eye that we should have about the situations happening around them and how people can take advantage of them and how things can turn really, really quickly. And I think that that's really good and really important to read about, but I think that the book wasn't quite as suspenseful for me as I think it was meant to be, because I just knew that Fiona was up to no good from the beginning, so I was already suspicious from her from the get-go. That doesn't mean this was a bad book by any means. I think I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because, again, it's a good book and it does really interesting things in terms of exploring Ruth's mental health, and there's even some things that are left pretty open-ended about her and Fiona and the way Fiona treated her. I don't want to say more than that. But again, I think that the less you know about this book going into it, the way more you will enjoy it. If this sounds interesting to you, I think that it's worth picking up, especially if you need a suggestion for that challenge for the Read Harder Challenge. But I do wish that I had gone into this book more blind than I did. All right, so that is everything that I have read so far this month. Really quickly, I am reading Rincey by Madeline Miller. I am loving this. As of this recording, I think I'm about almost to the halfway point. I think I'm at 40% or so. And yeah, really, really enjoying this. I'm sure that this is going to be a rave for me, but you can find out more of that at the end of the month. And then I also have been working my way through In a Different Key, The Story of Autism by John Donovan and Karen Zucker. This one is so good too. This is a book that I am surprisingly devouring. It's very long, so it's a very good thing that I am devouring it, but I sort of broke it up and I was like, okay, in order to finish it by the end of the month, I need to read 2 chapters a night. But I have actually been reading significantly more than that. This is super, super readable. I'm still only 100 or so pages into this book, but I'm really enjoying this one a whole lot, and I have a very strong feeling I'm going to be highly recommending this one as well to you guys. But again, I will talk about it more at the end of the month when it's actually finished. So yeah, that's everything that I have for you guys. Feel free to comment down below letting me know what you guys have thought of any of these books that I've talked about today. If you have read them yourself or if you have any questions, obviously you can always leave that down in the description below as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.